I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to the author of this measure, Mr. Smith, who, as U.S. Chairman of the Helsinki Commission, works with our European allies to improve the security and improve the safety of these Jewish communities in Europe. We appreciate his authorship of this resolution, and I ask unanimous consent that he be allowed to control the time.
Without objection, the gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for the remaining time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Chairman Royce for his leadership on this very important human rights issue, as he has done so ably and effectively on all of these issues, particularly his leadership on Iran, and that, of course, would be echoed with Eliot Engel's excellent work there as well. This is a group of leaders that have made a huge difference. So thank you, Chairman Royce, for that. H.Res 354, Mr. Speaker, prescribes specific, effective actions that government should take in response to the deadly threats to the Jewish communities in Europe. As we all know, the number of violent anti-Semitic attacks have increased from 100 to 400% in some European countries since 2013 alone. The murders in Paris, in Copenhagen, and elsewhere reminded us that there are those who are motivated by anti-Semitic hate and have the will and the means to kill. I would just note parenthetically that my work in combating anti-Semitism began back in 1981, in my first term, from this very podium, speaking out in favor of Jewish refuseniks. And I joined Mark Levin and the NCSJ 1 year later in 1982 on a trip to the Soviet Union, where we met with men and women who were targeted by the KGB and by the Soviet evil empire simply because they were Jewish. Sadly, anti-Semitism has not abated, and in recent years it has actually worsened. So this resolution calls for the United States government to work with our European allies on specific actions that are essential to keep European Jewish communities safe and secure. It is based on consultations with the leading experts who are working directly with these communities. The resolution focuses on the formal partnerships between European law enforcement agencies and Jewish community security groups. Here in the United States, Mr. Speaker, the collaboration between the Department of Homeland Security and Security Community Network, an initiative of the Jewish Federation of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, has been essential to protecting Jewish communities here. The former partnerships between the Secure Community Trust in the United Kingdom and the Jewish Community Security Service in France and their respective governments are also excellent models that need to be emulated. The resolution emphasizes the importance of consistent two-way communication and information sharing between law enforcement agencies and Jewish community groups. It encourages the development of a pan-European information sharing, communication, and alerting system, and envisions governments, intergovernmental agencies, and Jewish communities working together on it. Such a system should function day-round and year-round and include training for personnel who are implementing it. The resolution also calls for European governments to support assessments in several key areas and accordingly adjust their actions and strategies. Details matter. The assessment should gather and analyze data on crimes committed, response from law enforcement, types of attacks or incidents that are most prevalent, and the types of targets that are most at risk. It is essential to understand how law enforcement agencies usually receive reports of anti-Semitic crimes and what initial actions they take when a report is filed. I remember years ago when I offered a resolution at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, we heard that it was just hooliganism and other kinds of acts done by young people. When you spray paint a swastika on a tombstone in a Jewish cemetery, when you deface a synagogue, and when you attack people simply because, or a man because he's wearing a yarmulke, clearly these are acts of anti-Semitic hate, and yet they were being dismissed as something that was other. Assessments are also needed on Jewish community security groups, particularly of their capabilities, resources, relationships with local law enforcement agencies, preparedness, including emergency response plans, and the extent to which their decision-making is based on the best available information, analysis, and practices. The resolution calls for governments to use these assessments to help these community groups develop common baseline safety standards. These standards should include, as I said before, training, controlling access to physical facilities, physical security measures, including cameras and crisis communications, emergency exercises and simulations, mapping access to facilities, and sharing information with law enforcement agencies should also be part of the standards. These assessments, Mr. Speaker, will help achieve the resolution's call for law enforcement personnel to be well-trained to monitor, prevent, and respond to anti-Semitic violence and to partner with Jewish communities. For all of these assessments, government should draw information from sources that include Jewish groups, law enforcement agencies, independent human rights NGOs, research initiatives, and other civil society groups and leaders. H.Res 354 calls for safety awareness and suspicious activity reporting campaigns, like, if you see something, say something, here in the United States. Other aspects of the resolution include appropriately integrating initiatives to counter violent extremism and those to combat anti-Semitism, and the urgency of implementing the declarations, decisions, and other commitments of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe that focus on anti-Semitism. To accomplish these goals, the resolution calls for European governments to ensure that they appoint or designate senior officials with the necessary authority and resources to combat anti-Semitism and collaborate with governmental and intergovernmental agencies, law enforcement, and Jewish community groups. Finally, the resolution reaffirms support for the mandate of the United States Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism as part of the broader policy of fostering international religious freedom, and urges the Secretary of State to continue robust U.S. reporting on anti-Semitism by the Department of State and the Special Envoy to combat and monitor anti-Semitism. I would note, parenthetically, that I authored the amendment to the Global Anti-Semitism Review Act, introduced and sponsored by Senator Voinovich of 2004, and my amendment created the Office to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism within the State Department, and that has proven to be a key tool in this fight. Mr. Speaker, the resolution has the support of leading organizations, and it has 89 co-sponsors, including all 8 of the co-chairs of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. I would like to acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, John Farmer, Jr., and Paul Goldenberg for their tireless efforts and dedication and leadership in fighting anti-Semitism and terrorism over the years. John is the former Attorney General of New Jersey and is now on the steering committee of the Institute for Emergency Preparedness and Homeland Security and co-director of the Faith-Based Community Security Program at Rutgers University. Paul is the executive director of the Secure Community Network and a senior advisor to the Institute and the program. Several major Jewish communities in Europe have relied on their counsel, and both have spent time on the ground within these communities. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge and single out for very, very special thanks and recognition Rabbi Andy Baker, personal representative of the OSCE Chair in Office on Combating Anti-Semitism and Director of the International Jewish Affairs for the American Jewish Committee. He has been critical to American leadership in Europe and in the United States in the fight against anti-Semitism.